Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Dharma Breeze. We're going to start tonight with a silent meditation. So if you could please sit up in your chair, firm with your feet on the floor and your shoulders relaxed. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, 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 namadats. All righty, so now we'll be chanting the Jusei Ge. So if you could please join me in the PDF, or it is on page number 55 in the red service book. Gagon Josegan Ishi Mujodo Shigan Fumanzok Sef Joshogak Gao Muryoko Fui Dai Seishu Fusai Shobingu Seifu Joshogak Gashi Jobutsudo Myosho Chojippo Kukyo Mishomon Seifu Joshogak Ryoku Jinshonen Joe Shubongyo Shigu Mujodo Isho Tenninshi Jinniki Endai Ko Fusho Musaido Shoujo Sankumyo Kosai Shuyakunan Kaihi Chiegen Meshi Konmoan Eisoku 小悪道、通達全宗門、高僧上満足、いよろじぽ、日月修寿期、天候音符言、一種解放像、公正功徳法、上王大修寿、説法四式、供養一切物、具足修徳本、元年出上満、徳意三害を、如仏無下知、通達未不詳、願学営力、投資最小損、志願略国家、大仙王感動、国書天人、東内妙見。ナマンダム、ナマンダブ、ナマンダブ、ナマンダブ、ナマンダブ、ナマンダブ。願にしく読、平等正祭、同壺大神、往生、あん、お、Namadats, namadats, 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 namadats. Good evening, everybody, again. Can you believe that it's October? I mean, I can't believe it. Time just seems to be flying so quickly. I want to thank you for joining us again and trying to get our momentum back up after taking some time off in August and some illness. So hopefully people will start getting back into the routine. But one of the nice things about this Dharma Breeze group is people do reach out to me. And so people will let me know that one of our faithful members went to a funeral today and is not here. So it's nice that they feel strong enough that they communicate with me to let me know why they're not here. So tonight I would like us, let's see, I lost my Word document here. I don't have it memorized either, Michael, so. So what I'd like to do is I would like to start with a passage of a reading. So please join me in Gasho. Don't try to share the Nembutsu teachings with others. Its warmth naturally transmits to others. One more time, it's very simple, but I think quite profound. Don't try to share the Nembutsu teachings with others. Its warmth naturally transmits to others. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, namadats, namadats. Those words are actually from our former bishop, Reverend Kodo Amezu. Many of you have met him. He was a great proponent or an advocate for the Eastern District and came every January when he would come to the military installations and also go to Seabrook and New York. And he and I had a very good rapport, and he was very glad that the East Coast is got its independent character and flavor. I picked this passage because tonight I'm going to be focusing on the concept of the Sangha, and that I think that the idea that the Sangha is not just there for us to hear the teachings, but for us to share the Dharma and have this transmission of the Nembutsu through warmth, through just being interacting with each other. I've mentioned before that I think most of us are quite aware that one of the basic Buddhist concepts that's in all schools of Buddhism is what we call the three treasures, which we do every Sunday, whether we say the three treasures or we do the Tisarana, where we take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And as I've said before, that this simple taking refuge is so significant that this is what they have us do when we go through ordination. It's that powerful. We don't say we had to say it in Japanese, of course, when we got ordained, but it's simply taking the refuge. And I think the first two are very obvious, is I take refuge in the Buddha. For us in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, that we honor and respect Shakyamuni Buddha, but we also focus our attentions on our cosmic or symbolic Buddha, Amida Buddha, and the idea of wisdom and compassion. So maybe a Shin slant on that would be is when I take refuge in the Buddha, we can think about the concept of Amida Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma, means I take refuge in the teachings. And the Dharma is universal. It can be from the words of the Buddha, or it could be from one of his descendants, like Shingon Shonin. And today what I'm talking about is the Sangha. And the Sangha, in the general view of Buddhism, especially in the Theravadan tradition, Sangha is identified as the monks or the nuns, the people that are ordained. And that creates a little bit of a difference between their status and the status of the followers. As many of you know, that as Shingon Shonin was married, and then when he got pardoned from the emperor, instead of going back to his becoming a monk, he remained married to his family, married to his wife and his family, which made a very strong statement. So as we know, that time, probably a lot of monks or ordained people probably had concubines or people on the side, but Shingon Shonin acknowledged that this was his family and was the foundation of how Shin Buddhism would take a different path, that even the ordained ministers or clergy would be householders, which is quite different. But yesterday I was talking, I enjoy talking to Michael. It's like, we should probably get online an hour beforehand, Michael. It's like, because we get to talk. But as all of you are aware, that if you're at the temple in person, whether it's at Ekoji or New York Buddhist Church here, you have people come in and start asking questions. And a lot of times they come from different angles, which is a challenge. I'm sure Eric has experienced this too. So I've had archaeology students come in and they're talking about, what does the Nembutsu mean? Well, this last weekend, I had architecture students come in, and they're wanting to know the architectural differences about what a temple is. And I explained, and I won't do a Dharma talk on that, and maybe I will sometime, because I think this group might be interested, but the way that a hondo traditionally is laid out is very different than how a Christian church is laid out. And simply because a lot of the Buddhist churches of America's temples were put into old churches, especially on the West Coast, they have to take that orientation. And so Ekoji is very fortunate because we were able to build the hondo to our specifications. So that's more of the traditional design, not the onaijin itself, but the way that it's laid out on the horizontal. But anyway, so these students were asking these questions, and they were focusing more on the silent movie star's house. I mean, I guess that's a little more sexy than a Buddhist temple. But I had my introduction to Buddhist class, and so they came in and they sat because they wanted to know a little bit about that. And the idea that came up is that one of the questions that was asked is, well, why are there so many different Buddhist schools? And I explained that, there's two key components to most types of Buddhist schools. And one is doctrine, what sutras we follow, like with the Tendai Shu is the Lotus Sutra, or the same thing with Nichiren Shu. For us, we follow the Pure Land Sutras. So that is one of the divisions that we have, is that what doctrines we focus on, or what is very important to how we interpret the Dharma. The other one is practices. And I think for the general public, maybe this is easier to understand, because when they think of like the Zen practitioners who are sitting in Zazen meditation in the lotus position and they're doing meditation, that's a very different form of practice, a much more formalized form of practice than we do in Jodo Shinshu. Or I think maybe in contemporary America, I think maybe the average person is a little more familiar with the Tibetan rituals, which of course are esoteric and can be quite elaborate with the prayer wheels. And that's kind of questions that I get, and I'm sure Eric does too. It's like, what are these things that they're doing? What are their practices? So with that in mind, I'm like everybody else. I get mail downstairs. I have my own mailbox, and sometimes I forget about it. And I open it up, and it's like a preface, like all these things fall out. And what came out of this was the current issue of Lion's Roar. And I would just like to take a moment to talk about this resource for maybe people that are not familiar with it. Lion's Roar is a national publication on Buddhist. It's a Buddhist journal. This is a magazine that is designed for people from all different schools of Buddhism. One of the important things for us to know that maybe some people don't know is that the current bishop of the Buddhist Churches of America, Reverend Harada, is on the board. So it's nice, because I think what is happening is that we're having more representation of Pure Land Buddhism in the magazine as a result of that. One of the things that people might not be aware of, this used to be Shambhala's son, and they changed their publication, and one of the major focal points was, and again, this is an off subject, but I'm wanting to share this resource with people. Don't worry, we'll get back to what I'm talking about. But the idea is that a lot of the publications like Tricycle and Shambhala's son would focus on Caucasian practitioners of Buddhism, predominantly males. And it was really skewed with the disproportionate representation of Caucasian European American males, where, as we know, that Buddhism comes from Eastern countries, and like Jodo Shinshu is from the Japanese origins. So the magazine is consciously trying to include people of color, trying to include women, and it does have a very different feel when you look at it, and all of these are practitioners. Now, this particular issue talks about, and for our members that are Asian American, they talk about celebrating Buddhists of Asian descent. So what they're doing is they're pulling out, talking to people from different groups that are Asian American and different backgrounds, and what do you think? Now, Reverend Harada participated in this. And before I go on to what they're talking about community, and I'm going to butcher the name, I'm sure, Michael. So one of the people that contributes is Ching Sing Hon, a Chinese American woman. And one of the things that she wrote in this, because they're asking questions about what do you get out of your community? What do you get out of your Sangha? What do you get out of going to temple? And I just wanted to read this because I think this is a very important historical piece. She says that I want to honor Aaron Lee, the quote unquote angry Asian Buddhist blogger who brought attention to the white-centric views of the English language Buddhist media. It is hard to believe that it's been 7 years since he passed. Many of us are indebted to his writing and legacy. I remember him grasping with his heritage convert distinctions, being brought up Jewish even though he had a Buddhist grandmother. These binaries are increasingly tricky, especially when talking to young people who may feel like a mix of heritage and convert, including second and third generation, Black and white, Latino, and Native American Buddhists. There is so much to learn from each other. In my work, I see the beauty in having a mix of people who feel more culturally Buddhist, and those are new to the practice. So here they're talking about the diversity of the Sangha, but also what she's saying, which I agree with, and those of us that are members of Dharma Breeze and Ekoji, we realize that what binds us together as a Sangha is the Buddhist culture. It's not being, Jodo Shinshu or being Japanese. That's what binds us together with our different backgrounds. And by the way, he did get a photo op. There's Bishop in his photo. So pulling back, I would like to start out with her first passage, which I think is brilliant. I don't believe that one of our members tonight who's had a very similar experience is participating tonight. But when they asked her about being part of the Sangha, she says that for the past 20 years, I have been blessed to encounter the Dharma through various communities, since frequent moves have prevented me from attaining one temple regularly. I'm indebted to the Buddhist churches of America, numerous Cambodian, Vietnamese, Chinese, Taiwanese, Thai, and Lao temples, in places like the East Bay Meditation Center for me to bring breadth and diversity of American Buddhism. So I thought that this was interesting that they are addressing this, and even though the issue is focusing on Asian Americans' heritage, is that they're bringing back to the universality of the Dharma. I think that's one of the things that I try to do as a minister when I am talking, or as a Buddhist minister. It's a very heavy burden to represent Buddhism, the beautiful history and culture and teachings that we have. But what I think I always try to do is I try to convey that it's very much a universal teaching. So getting back to a little bit more of a personal journey. So, we talk about, when I was talking earlier, talking to the students about practices, and I did a Dharma talk here in New York about what is the motivation for us to come to temple. We didn't talk about practices, but is it important for us to have the right mindset to come in and hear the Dharma, or are we just assured of rebirth because of the 18th vow? That's not a talk for here, but it's the idea of not only practice, but what is motivation, is direction important, which sometimes has been, I think, discounted in Shin Buddhism. But getting back to the idea is like when people come in, let's see, I talk to so many people all the time. It gets hard to try to keep the story straight. But I was talking to a Japanese member. Yes, yesterday I talked to a Japanese member, born Japanese member. She came for a pet memorial service, and she talked about how, and it was in the past that, she didn't feel comfortable coming. And it was once she got started having outreach from fellow Sangha members that they had started including her and calling her by name, that she felt more comfortable, because even as a Japanese person who was a Buddhist in Japan, coming to the temple was awkward. And I think that she talked about, and then she was actually, her and her husband were married in the temple here about 10 years ago. So she's gone full circle with that. But I can relate to that as well, because I think that as many of you know, I lived in Japan for almost 5 years in my mid-20s. And that's when I came to encounter the Buddhist Dharma. And I don't think you have to go to Japan I did not encounter Jodo Shinshu until I returned to the United States, ironically, but I did encounter Buddhism. And for those of you that have lived abroad, and there's several of you here that have, I can't explain the sense of homesickness or loneliness that can pour over you living in a foreign language, or foreign culture, excuse me, where I didn't speak the language very well. I was very isolated. And that, that the idea was that the pace of life, that everything that is so exotic about Japan sometimes turned into a negative. You just wanted to have a regular day where you felt grounded, because living in a foreign culture, you're always thinking, well, how would the Japanese do this? I don't want to be impolite to the Japanese. And so you're not Japanese, but you're trying to think of ways, you're not acting completely 100% yourself. At least I tried to. I didn't want to be the ugly American. So easy to do. And that was when I came across, and I've mentioned this in other talks, where I stumbled literally across a study group on Buddhism that met once a week, a 5-minute walk from where I was working. And what came out of that is that we would have a different speaker in English every week, talking about different subject matters. But then I ended up being invited to go to Taisho Daigaku, which is a university in northern Tokyo in Ikebukuro. And interestingly enough, that is a Buddhist university of both Tendai, which is Shinran Shonin school, and then Shingon, which is another esoteric school, or Mikyo school of Buddhism in Japan. And so I got the next 3 years, I got to sit down and listen to them teaching the Japanese Dharma in English, so the Japanese monks could hear English. I went for the Dharma. But the byproduct of this is that I started to have true friends in Japan. That I had friends that, of course, the language barrier was a little better because some of them spoke fairly good English. But this idea that all of a sudden I was not isolated, I was reading all my Buddhist book. I was a very good nightstand Buddhist. I had all these books, and living in Japan, there was a resource of English books that were not available in the United States at that time. And so Dogen and all these other people I was reading, but it was like very sterile because I didn't have anybody to bounce it off. My partner at the time was not Buddhist, and so I would read these books and like, okay, that's nice. I'm happy for you, but no interaction. So then when I met these fellow-minded people, that we started going to the kisatens or the coffee shops after we would have a session, and we'd have all these ideas go back and forth. And then that was the real first taste of the human dimension of the teachings. That I was not in isolation. And no, it wasn't a class, it wasn't a lecture, it wasn't a seminar, but it was a time for me to express the Dharma in a way and get feedback on that. And it was very exciting for me. I look forward to going to the coffee shop as much as going to the sessions almost towards the end of it, because it's like, well, what do you think about this? And I think especially for us, when coming to America and being exposed to Jodo Shinshu in Seattle, and having a community again, I realized that the teachings, we don't have a rigorous practice that we follow in Shin Buddhism especially, but we have the Sangha where we can interact with each other. And like as Reverend Umezu said in the beginning reading that I read, that it's kind of like this osmosis. For those that have been fortunate enough to be at a larger temple, and I'm not knocking at Ekoji, but Ekoji is not the same size as Midwest or as the Seattle Betsuine, and you have this legacy of generations of people that have gone through this. I learned so much from the people that were in their 70s and 80s, and they never once sat down and said, well, Kurt, that this is, this is what Shinjin is, and this is what Shinjin means. There was never a conversation like that. But the way that they express themselves, the way that they carry their lives. And for me, later as a minister, when dealing with people on their deathbeds, the honor of seeing how they've incorporated the Buddhist teachings through their life and in the way that they express themselves in their practice. And as I've said, I've never had a Makara Gyo or Appella service where someone is upset or thinking that they're going to go to a bad place or be reincarnated as something. Everybody's always been very calm and more worried about the family they're leaving or their friends they're leaving behind, that the afterlife is resolved for them. And I think that you get this through the Sangha. And for us that are maybe a little more book-centric, there'd be some of us that we get together and talk about a book or have a book club. But the idea of the Sangha is a way for us to have that living Dharma that is not accessible only for us doing things alone, reading books. I'm older, so I'm like everyone else with the pandemic. I did not have much exposure to Zoom. This whole idea of the ministry or having something as Dharma Breeze is just a completely new paradigm for me, and I think a very successful one. And I think that this idea of the Sangha now spreads out, as Andrew likes to say, we have a worldwide Sangha with Ekoji and with Dharma Breeze. And so the idea is that the Sangha, again, we are connecting, though we're not there physically in person, but we are sharing the Dharma and we are sharing our thoughts and hopefully growing from that. And it's interesting because when you think back that the Buddha lived over 2,500 years ago, and it could have so easily died out. Think of the thousands and tens of thousands of people that have had these groups in India, in Nepal, and in Japan, and in China, and now in America. It's quite amazing. That is the living legacy of Shakyamuni and the teachings and the universality of it. So I hope that you enjoy getting together on Wednesday nights, and I hope that you do have the opportunity to go to Ekoji in person, because there is something special about sharing a meal with somebody or helping. Especially Eric would say, yeah, helping clean the temple, right, Eric? But seriously, as everybody that goes to larger temples, that there is a camaraderie that comes out of these non-spiritual things as well. So I'd like to finish with Reverend Umezu's line. If you could please join me in Gasho. Don't try to share the Nembutsu teachings with others. Its warmth naturally transmits to others. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Okay, we'll go on now to a group reading. So if everybody could please join me in reading the pledge number 1 on the PDF or on page 4. The creed number 1. We reply upon Amida Tathagata with our whole heart for the enlightenment in the life to come, abstaining from all sundry practices and teachings, giving up the trust in our limited self. We believe that the assurance of birth comes at the very moment we entrust, and we call the name Namo Amida Butsu in joy and gratitude for the Buddha's compassion. We also acknowledge gratefully the benign benevolence of our founder and succeeding masters who have led us to believe in this profound teaching, and we do now endeavor to follow throughout our lives the way laid down for us. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadas. Okay, I'd like to finish now with another short sitting. So if you could please sit straight in your chair, feet on the floor, and your shoulders relaxed. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadas.